It really does sometimes feel like a sick old world out there, particularly when you've got an entire side of politics that seems to glory in death and destruction so long as it's their enemies on the receiving end. Now, late last week in Washington, D.C., this young couple who worked at the Israeli embassy in the U.S. Capitol were gunned down in cold blood, allegedly by this man, Elias Rodriguez, a hard-left radical with a long history of support for communist, socialist, and pro-Palestine causes, as they left an event at a Washington Jewish museum. Tragic, horrible stuff. But here in this footage, Rodriguez, who has been charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, yells out his support for Palestine. Well, while the New York Times and CNN and everybody else try to discern a motive, I think there you have it, because ever since October 7th, we have seen enthralls from hard-left groups, radicals, and campus organizers to bring the Intifada home. Yes, that's what they've called for, and now it seems like that just may well have happened. But this case keeps getting curiouser and curiouser. According to reporting by the New York Post, Rodriguez's dad has close ties to the Democratic left and was even invited to Donald Trump's joint address to Congress earlier this year by a far-left lawmaker. All very curious, but not as curious as the failure of the left to condemn rather than celebrate these killings, with trolls even in Australia commenting on Jewish groups' posts about the murders, saying, quote, "good riddance." Just sick stuff. And of course, this has become a global phenomenon. I mean, just look at the comments running here on this live feed of a police update on the shooting, all filled with calls to, again, yes, that idiot chant, "Free, free Palestine," which is what the alleged killer shouted, as I played before, when he was taken into custody. And of course, there are demands as well there for the destruction of the Jewish state. Meanwhile, in Washington, there was Democrat squad member Ilhan Omar, who couldn't even bring herself to condemn the shooting herself.
Congresswoman Omar, can I get your reaction to the shooting that happened in D.C. last night?
I'm going to go for now.
Yes, that's right. She's just going to go for now. What an absolutely cowardly response. Meanwhile, in Canada, a Greens candidate in Alberta named Jaden Baldonado appeared to celebrate the murders, saying peaceful protest has failed, in comparing the shooter to Luigi Mangione, who was accused of shooting dead the CEO of an American health insurer on a Manhattan street last year. Also in Canada, this TikToker seemed to revel in the deaths and hoped the shooter would be taken care of in jail.
I'm at the buy some dishes, make a whole eat me for dinner. All of my eyes, I can't see. I'm at the jump out my body,
And no, I don't think she means taken care of in the sarcastic sense that you or I might think either. But for unhinged reactions, there's no going past this fellow, a guy called Guy Christensen, who not only defended the killings, but said he was even more of a hero, the alleged shooter, than Aaron Bushnell, the U.S. Air Force airman who set himself on fire in front of the Israeli embassy in Washington in protest of what was going on in Gaza. Get a load of this guy.
I take it back. I do not condemn the elimination of those 2 Zionist officials who worked at the Israeli embassy last night, and here's why. He spent his days working at the Israeli embassy, fighting to maintain Israel's genocide and support for that genocide in this country. He is a war criminal. And the same was true for the woman. This was not because they were Jewish, it was because they were Zionist. And a manifesto from the suspect in custody, Elias Rodriguez, who apparently, if we are to believe this is true, he is part of the movement, and he has consistently posted about Palestine. He targeted these 2 because of their connection to the state of Israel, because they are Zionists not because they are Jews. And I want to remind you that while this attack took the lives of 2 human beings, Israel has murdered thousands of Palestinian civilians in cold blood without any shame. I ask you, what is the difference between Elias Rodriguez and Aaron Bushnell to you? Perhaps the only difference I can see is that Aaron Bushnell's sacrifice in flames, protesting his government's role in a genocide he could no longer bear to be a part of, is more palatable to this world, because he did not throw the final stone in his last moments at the mob of criminals whose suffering they've brought to this world is more than this world can bear any longer.
Nice perm, kid. Hey, make of that what you will, but it feels to me like we are going back into the same cycle of history we saw in the 1960s, when the left glorified cretinous murderers from Che Guevara to Charles Manson in the name of revolution. Now they're doing it again, celebrating Hamas and calling for their style of nihilistic violence to be reenacted in the West again.
Thanks, James. That's deeply disturbing, particularly that last character. I mean, the whole story is just horrific. But this is what happens if the West doesn't have the moral leadership to stand up and say this stuff is wrong. At the universities, in the streets, it is wrong. This is
why, it's been such an absolute disaster for the last almost 2 years now, that we've seen these campus occupations, and the big chant has been over and over again, bring the Intifada home, bring the Intifada home. That means terrorism. That means murder. That means what we saw here on the streets. And this is all part of that broader decolonize rhetoric. It's not just anti-Semitism, but it is anti-Western decolonizing rhetoric that leads to this sort of violence.
Well, that's one of their popular chants, popular philosophies when it comes to this issue, is about globalizing the Intifada, and this is what it means. And even when October 7 happened, there were academics in the States, people often with profiles, and a few of them were bold in saying, what did you think decolonisation meant? Did you think it was just going to be a paper? This is what decolonisation is. So I think we've got to realise that, and when we talk about decolonising the curriculum at different universities and their projects happening at Australian universities about decolonising, we've got to see how sinister and ugly it is, because it's always presented as some progressive, inclusive, lovey-dovey thing,
vile,
when it is
hateful.
absolutely ugly and destructive. And again, we talk about the culture wars. You don't fight the culture wars. This is what happens.
Exactly.
This is all culture wars.